best way to rediscover America was on the famed Appalachian Trail. I did not realize there was this whole parallel community that sets off every spring and tries to hike the entire trail from Georgia to northern Maine in 1 year. And immediately, with my background as I like to joke, a streetwalker, I thought I would like to try that. It runs 14 states, 2,175 miles. I'm 6'11". And one of the things I did right, honestly, was I chose my own trail name, Skywalker. Because if you don't choose your own trail name, you're going to get labeled by others. And how is that going to happen? Well, it's the first time you do something stupid. You're going to pick, when you meet some guy named Snot Rag or some guy named Rat Puke, well, he didn't choose that trail name himself. It's when something, when he made some blunder. But I chose mine early on, and it stuck with me because I made plenty of blunders and I would have come up with something less flattering. The first state is Georgia. You're in Georgia for 76 miles. And that is where you are the greenest. It's where you're the scaredest. And that is where I made possibly my worst error. I was getting anxious. I really wanted to try to go long, but the weather was diabolical that day. And we hiked 9 miles and we got to a shelter. The Appalachian Trail has a shelter about every 10 miles, which makes it, again, a very user-friendly place. They're three-sided shelters, They're not the Hilton Hotel, but they will keep you dry. But a lot of people were congregated around there. It was early afternoon, and I knew I was going to be sitting there cold all day, and I decided, no, I'm not stopping here like everybody else. I'm going to try to get over Blue Mountain and hike all the way to Unicoi Gap, and I'm going to hitchhike into Helen, Georgia, and spend the night in a warm bed after 20 miles, after a 20-mile hike. Well, I was going higher and higher and higher. I was alone. I didn't see a single person the rest of the day. The weather got worse and worse, colder and colder, windier and windier. The visibility got worse and worse, and I got scared and probably hypothermic. I dropped down in the middle, I lay down in the middle of the trail and wrapped my tarp around me and immediately just got buffeted and battered by the wind. The next state is North Carolina. And when you say North Carolina, you're really talking about North Carolina and Tennessee, because the trail keeps going back and forth along the border there. And so you're up there and it's really cold, it's rainy, it's just kind of a forced march, muddy, forest completely dormant. There was a visitors, not a visitor's center, but there were a couple bathrooms, and we were going to spend the night in the bathrooms. But the ranger figured out what we were doing. That was where I finally turned the boat. That was finally where I finally turned it around. It was kind of the turning point in northwestern North Carolina. I finally got my legs, the weather got warmer again, and I started finally doing the bigger miles I was going to need to do. Next state is Virginia, which, as we mentioned, is the longest state, over 500 miles in Virginia. And that's kind of where the trail becomes, you start feeling like, hey, this is a little bit more like a job to through hike. That you have that initial frisson of excitement, those first two states. You're just everything is new, you're wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, and now you realize, hey, there's a root canal aspect to this. You got to get up. You're not going to feel like hiking every day, but you got to get out there and do it. It's more of a thing that throughout the day, kind of a task you go through, a tour of your psyche. By the end of the day, I was almost always in a really good mood. You're in Virginia for over 500 miles, then you're in West Virginia for 2.5 miles. But it's a notable 2.5 miles because Harper's Ferry, you go right through Harper's Ferry, which is where the headquarters of the Appalachian Trail is. They take your photograph and all that kind of stuff. West Virginia and Maryland were two easy states. And beautiful weather that time of year. Everybody's got their racehorse shoes on, trying to go as fast as they can. Next state. So then you're in Pennsylvania. And every state is probably known for one thing. If you ask any Appalachian Trail hiker what Pennsylvania is known for, they're going to use one word, and it begins with an R. Can you guess what that is? It begins with an R. It's a noun. Rocks. Pennsylvania rocks, and I don't mean that like, hey, it rocks. It is, in Pennsylvania rocks, it is, these small, sharp stumble stones you run into all day, every day, and one rock to another. And actually, it's also known for the rattlesnakes, because there can be a lot of rattlesnakes under those rocks. Sometimes, every now and then you hear them, but you don't see them, and that is spine tingling. You get rocks and rattlesnakes, but you also got nice folks, authentic people. So all in all, not such a bad trade. Then you get into New Jersey. In New Jersey, every single hiker is going to tell you one word again, and it begins with a B: bears. And believe me, I mean, I liked hiking with people, but I was willing to hike alone. But in New Jersey, I was gonna hike with people because these bears don't seem to have any respect. You know, they're not afraid of you. They're stealing hikers' food. There have been bear attacks. The year I did it, the guy was in his sleeping bag and got drugged by a bear out in, several feet away. All hell broke loose, and all the other hikers started throwing things at the bear, and the bear just kind of trotted off into the woods. Then you go into New York, the Empire State, and New York sucker punched us. And you're thinking, all right, here's where I'm gonna make my time, in those mid-Atlantic states. And yeah, you're making better time, and the days are longer. You're there in the summertime. The bugs are awful. You get to New York, people don't even seem to know much about the Appalachian Trail. It's not as well marked and so forth. So what we resorted to improvisation. What you do when you needed to hitchhike into a town to resupply, if you were with a girl, you would put her out on the highway. The guys would hide in the woods. Of course, the first truck or car that comes along, stops, with this look, this great glowing look on his face, and then all of a sudden these grizzled males, sweaty males pour out of the woods, and that look goes from one of, whatever to horror. But anyway, so then you get into Connecticut. So you're in you go through 5 of the 6 New England states. You're only in Connecticut for probably about 6 days. Hikers are not treated as some kind of like freak show. They're really welcome in that kind of town. You tend to be a little fragrant when you get to a place like that after several days out in the wood, but they really make you feel valued. You're in Connecticut for less than a week, then you're in Massachusetts. You can't imagine how many times you're walking along and you get near some road and there's a cooler. And immediately, your eyes light up. Some trail angel has left some sodas or snacks or so forth for you to eat. But then you're in Vermont, and Vermont has quite the hiking culture, which is a treat. Again, to go right through the main streets, this pristine citadel of American academia. You resupply there. There wasn't really much anywhere for hikers to stay. We came up with we improvised all kinds of different ways. People sleeping in dormitory halls and so forth. Before heading off on what may be the toughest state, New Hampshire. And of course, there you start heading up well above tree line, and that's where you are most of the time in the whites. It's drop dead gorgeous. You got to be careful. But the hiking is tough. It's part of that state. I think geography is a great determinant of character, and the New Hampshire kind of cantankerous, that would be an adjective I associate with New Hampshire. It's got to come from their geography. Now you're in Maine, the 14th state, and you're in it for 280 miles. It is, there's a big debate which state is the tougher, New Hampshire or Maine. And if your favorite state isn't New Hampshire, it's probably Maine. The car tags say the way things ought to be, and it really should be. All kinds of surging waterways, and it's the most isolated state. The last 100 miles you're in what's called a 100-mile wilderness. There's not a single road or anything going through there. You better have your food calibrated correctly. Finally, you make it through there. We had all kinds of problems there because the problem was the streams. You get a big thunderstorm in some stream that normally you could just rock hop right across. Next thing you know, you can't get across it that day. You spend the night on the banks of it and hope the water goes down overnight, which it usually does unless you get more rain. If I hiked that trail 10 times, I'd hike it every single time going from south to north because you're finishing on such a high note. I chose to walk, and it's a good way to meet people. It brings the best out of people.